Welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Ilana Levin, and this is a podcast at the intersection of superhero junk and movements for social change. This is the show for people who might not have a lasso of truth yet, but do have an anti-ice whistle. Today, we are back to talk about Peacemaker Season 2. It's an HBO show from showrunner and now head of all things DCEU universe, television, film, media, anything that's DC that goes on the screen, James Gunn. And we covered season 1 on the podcast several years back. We were huge fans of it. We really loved the show. One of the things I loved about it was the show's amazing use of some of my favorite, much maligned popular music of the 80s, what often gets referred to now as hair metal, as to soundtrack the series. And I was so excited to have an excuse to bring some of that to new fans and new listeners who may have written it off in the past and were giving it a shot for the first time. I actually even went as far as to write an article for Women Write About Comics where I talk up some of the glam metal bands that didn't quite make it to the show. So it was easy to sell me on watching season 2. You guys can check it out now on HBO. Get it quickly because for all I know, there may be an HBO boycott soon, since those motherfuckers have been running ICE ads. But to talk about it with me in some depth is a friend of the podcast who I haven't had on in far too long and is exactly the right person for this conversation. It's Arturo Garcia. He has done everything from covering San Diego Comic-Con for Rolling Stone, reporting for Truth or Fiction and Raw Story and Snopes, debunking all kinds of mishigas. And he was the longtime managing editor for the dearly departed racialicious.com, which pioneered analysis of the intersection between race and pop culture. He is also a lifelong pro wrestling fan, which means he got to see John Cena, the man, the meme, the actor, develop in the public eye for most of his career. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, especially talking about this show. And as we record this, we are nearing the twilight of John Cena's pro wrestling career after what's been a tumultuous year there as well.
I somehow didn't realize he was still wrestling.
He was not. For the longest time, he's been on hiatus precisely because he was pursuing his acting, and not only in Peacemaker, but he did an Amazon movie with Idris Elba, which this being Cena and wrestling also lent itself to controversy. And at the beginning of the year, he came back and announced that this would be his final, not full time, but his final active year as a pro wrestling talent, at least for WWE. And that's there's been speculation on that front as well, as with all things pro wrestling, seemingly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I had just assumed this was his life now. In fact, I half was figuring that, like so many people, he'd been injured on the job and was like going and doing something new. But I do want to tell our listeners, we're going to start off with a brief spoiler-free conversation to give you a sense of whether or not this is a show that you'll want to check out. And then we're going to go full spoilers after, but we will not go into spoilers until we give you the heads up warning. So Arturo, I'm assuming you liked season 1 or else you wouldn't have been joining me for season 2. Did you enjoy watching the show enough to feel like your time was well spent?
No. I would say if you're a completist, or if you're a fan of John Cena the talent, which is not a knock, he's amassed a body of work now that you can say that and hopefully not feel too bad about yourself. I would say go for it. If you were a fan of season 1, I would say this is skippable, and I would also say that James Gunn understands.
It's interesting because I feel really differently. Like, I'm not a completist. I very famously say that I don't watch superhero media that looks like it might be bad. Life is too short. I have other interests too. And I really thought this was good. I feel like there is something special magic that is missing from this season that was present in the last one. Last season felt more electrifying to me, but I am glad I watched this. I've been doing rewatch to prep for our conversation, and there is one big political moment which we will not talk about until we get into spoilers that felt to me like it was something important to be said and important to be heard at this moment in history. There was a moment where I was like, holy shit, he really did go there, and I'm proud of him. Which, if you guys listen to my podcast coverage of the Superman movie had many moments of, holy shit, I can't believe he went there. I'm very proud of him. I think that there are certain characters who are less well served this season than last. That's not the top of my agenda, to be honest. I missed having as many old glam metal bands appearing in this season, though I also understand the very valid project that he's doing of helping to popularize contemporary bands that are playing music of that style. I certainly have found out about, well, for me, modern means bands from the past 20 years. Modern bands playing stuff that I like. I've definitely found out from watching the show. And actually, I would say that I think the real fantasy, never mind the superpowers and the secret agent stuff and the aliens and all that. I think the real fantasy of Peacemaker is the fantasy of getting your adult friends to listen to your music with you and them actually liking it.
There is that. I did question the musical choices. I went back and listened to your season one recap. That will be
Mhm.
from March 11th, 2022. For fans out there, you want to go back and listen to that on graphicpolicy.com.
Yes.
And I think because of the function of the show, it veered away from a lot of what made the first one pop. And we'll get into this deeper, but uh, to me, the story of the show, the theme of the show, was about a problem that James Gunn is trying to confront as part of his larger responsibility. And ultimately, I feel he went with a shocking visual to get around that, or to kind of shorthand his way through that.
Mhm.
Um, and you're right, there were shocking moments, but I don't think the work to make it stick was done here.
Mm.
In fact, I would argue that the Berlanti verse was better on that front.
Oof, that's brutal because the Relantiverse is full of terrible, terrible acting and character assassination of various things I've read in years. I mean, would you say the performances are stellar in this though?
I would say the performances are good. The material does not rise to meet them, unfortunately. I thought
Mm.
Gunn employed a couple of specific examples, or at least one specific example of a writing shorthand that made me grimace. And I would also argue that from a political standpoint, uh, he undercuts some of the points he made in Superman.
Mm. Interesting. Well, you can see this as divisive here. A character that felt like kind of a bit of a joke in ways that made me feel uncomfortable in season one was Judo Master, who I think is really fantastic in season two. I'm very excited about gay vegetarian Buddhist superhero who is like, it's impressive to have a small person act and do a physical performance in which I'm like, I can believe this person can kick this larger person's ass. Like, it takes a lot for me to believe you on that just because of the nature of physics. And when I see Nali's performance as judo master, I'm like, yes, I believe that that person can absolutely be a physical threat to these much larger, like dudes on this series. He kicks so much ass. And I'm excited for another character in the DC universe. And there's a wonderful conversation he has, we'll talk about in the spoiler section, with someone who he hadn't had a chance to really engage with before. That was just like exactly what I was looking for. But I guess I would say that like I had been maybe a little bit cynical about some of the hardcore performance stuff in season one. And in season two, I'm fully sold on this actress's performance. She does some complicated shit here that I don't think I quite had seen how much acting was going into her earlier character portrayal. Um, and I don't know. I mean, ultimately, this is the same show as season one in the sense that it is a misfit team of malfunctioning, troubled people. There's, comedic violence and brutal violence. There's social commentary going on. There's, a real like hair metal influenced soundtrack happening. And the government is up to some bullshit in every single instance you can possibly imagine. Uh, those are things I enjoy having in a superhero series. I mean, D-lister type comics as well as D-lister character type shows are kind of where my heart lies. I think sometimes you can have more creativity when you don't have to carry the weight of the people's expectations around those characters, and you can just do things that you can't get away with doing in like a flagship characters series. So this really is for me in those ways. You had some critiques about how it did or didn't really fit into the broader DCU world building piece, but like I can see how that can work, but I also just don't care. Like I'm comfortable. Peacemaker season 1 was kind of to be taken on its own terms as its own thing, and I did feel like this for me stood on its own as its own thing. The cliffhanger that it ends on does beg for follow up, but overall we still get to see something new and revelatory happen to this team of fucked up struggling people who are just trying to survive bad economic circumstances, abusive government employers, their parental issues, um, and all those other things like coming into play together.
My response is that this season of the show did not stand on its own. In fact, I would argue that it wasn't designed to stand on its own. And I think there is a version of a second season of this show that beyond its interaction with Superman and even Creature Commandos could have better addressed the story of Chris Smith and his friend without sacrificing as much as it did. And I think the choices made by Gunn, uh, some of them political, some of them not, uh, put too low of a ceiling on it to really do what what I think you want in a second season show, which is uh, move these characters along a bit further. Not just the characters, but the characterizations. You want to find out something new about them. And there were cases where I feel we regressed. I felt we regressed as a viewing experience.
That's true for one person and not true for the others, but we will talk about that in the spoilers, the spoiler section. Do you have any final spoiler free notes before we dive into that?
I thought of one specific thing that the hardcore of season one could have would have done here that to me would have been much funnier than what we got.
I will say that I have not gone back to rewatch season 1 when I began watching season 2. The show's recaps are well done enough that you can get away with that. I actually generally feel like DC has been pretty good at recapping for their television series. Um, and sometimes it can maybe telegraphs a bit too much, but it does make it easy to kind of jump in and out. And for those of you who enjoyed the opening dance number from last season, we do have a new opening dance number this season. This song did not grab me immediately. I actually didn't really come around to this song till near the end of the season. I partially because it's like a really fucking bad song to dance to. Like, I do not envy the choreographer who was given this song and told to come up with a dance number that non-professional dancers would do that would be interesting enough for us all to watch and was to a song that just did not have a dancing rhythm. But the choreographer did somehow do it. But by the end of this season, I was like, I like this song. I like this song.
I can't join you there. I am no
You didn't make it over there.
I freely admit I am nowhere near as knowledgeable about metal as a genre as you. I can say that as a child of the Headbangers Ball generation, I did get exposure to various subgenres. Because if you stay in the first hour of that show, if you recall, they'll play the singles. They'll play what's hot on the radio or whatever. But if you made it to the third hour, that's where you got glimpses at thrash and some hardcore. And that was my first exposure to Testament and Exodus, just to name a couple of groups. And I
Yeah.
didn't go all in on that, but it did give me, and I'm lucky for this. It did give me perhaps a more well-rounded look at metal than maybe some of my peers that were experiencing at that point. This song just did not grab me. I was thinking about, in prep for this conversation, I thought about the song, and it struck me that to me, a lot of contemporary artists who you said attempting to update metal or hair metal, however you want to put it, face some of the same difficulties as synthwave artists in that there's a balance you strike between how do you conjure up a genre and a mood without sounding too derivative, and it's really easy to fall into that trap.
Yeah. I think this was a lot more of a band, Foxy Shazam, doing something new that sounded like us from it sounded like us from the 70s, but that it was new. Whereas last season was all very, very 80s. This was a lot more like Journey in the song style, I would say. Well, let's go full spoilers and start from there. I'm going to open the full spoilers. The notion that Chris Smith ends up in a Nazi world and doesn't realize it for a long time is, I think, wonderful social commentary. I was intrigued. I'm intrigued by the questions of how long it took for audiences to pick up on it as well. Because we recognized it before you did, for sure. But and it was a second where it was like, as soon as we were articulated, like, could that be? I'm like, no, I'm 100% convinced that is what it is. Um, I thought that was really bold. And my complaint was just that once you present this, I really wanted the series to stick with it longer, because that is a really weighty piece of information to give people. And even to have Peacemaker's dad basically be the one who's like, oh, like, are we so different from your world after all? When it's like, no, you're like, you're not. But I felt like I wanted to take more time with that, to spend more time on that. And by the time we were beginning to deal with that, we were already moved along back to trying to wrap up the season. But that said, the entire concept of there being something happening in a world where the Nazis won World War II, and this is the US under Nazi control, and what that looks like for people, and basically having everybody who's a person of color being in a concentration camp. And that's the reality of this parallel universe. And Chris is forced to ask, like, are you gonna just let that be? Does your family being alive here excuse that to you? And he, to his credit, has to immediately, okay, no, this is not okay. I am not so sure that he wouldn't have taken more time to come to that conclusion that it was unacceptable. I don't know. How did you feel about the Nazi parallel world reveal?
To me, that was the overwhelming issue that ultimately spoiled the season for me. Just like you said, the series did not dig into this because it had to set up, and I can say it at this point now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, it set up James Gunn's upcoming take on Salvation Run, which, well, we can expand on that later. Um,
Hmm.
and season where uh, the middle of the season, the episodes were 20 to 25 minutes apiece, to the point where it really stuck out to me. I even made the observation, because I follow IO9's reviews and the AV Club's reviews, that kind of compare and contrast where the fan tenor is at this point. And I made the observation that it reminded me of some old Doctor Who serials. They were, 20 minutes apiece, and the end of the episode sometimes with the same type of cliffhanger as the beginning of it. So there wasn't a lot of progression going on, and we did get some very good moments. The scene where Adebayo is chased by this gang of by the population of Earth X. That is an amazing scene. Maybe the
Yeah.
James Gunn has been open about working with Danielle Brooks to make sure she was comfortable with it and could perform it. And I don't want to create the impression that I'm here to stir up a backlash against James Gunn. Actions like that, I make me take him at his word and think better of it. But in dropping a concept like Earth X, which, if you're not familiar with the comics world, has been the go-to designation for a Nazi-dominated planet. To do this for what it amounted to being almost a red herring, I just don't think you can do that. There are several other types of planets you can invoke to seize on Chris and his family history and take a spin on that. Because what we saw here, I don't think did what you need to do for this kind of story.
What evil parallel world would you have done for this?
I think a world where Augie Smith is, to use Marvel as shorthand, a Victor Von Doom level despot, or
Mm.
his world's Lex Luthor, while still being outwardly affectionate toward his sons, and possibly even a young wife. I think you get a lot of the same beats and conflicts with Chris, um, without burning this volatile of a card. Um,
See, I don't know that it's burned. I think you can come back to it, you know? I mean, you currently basically have an origin story for Peacemaker's brother's villain origin story, having just gone through this experience. Um, and I think that the political point that the show did do effectively by having it take place in this world is, well, one, again, the realization that did this world in which the Nazis won World War II feel that different to you? It didn't. But also the way that Augie, Chris's father, when our team rightly challenges Augie, they're like, fuck you, you're a Nazi. He's like, I am not a Nazi. I do not support this. And they're like, okay, but like you aren't fighting it, you're not stopping it. And he basically challenges them, like, are you stopping all incidences of like evil in your world? And I think that's a dodge from him, but it's also totally what he'd say. And it was useful in getting the team to question their own priorities and values as fighters, as individual heroes, which they wouldn't consider themselves as, but as we see them in this world. Like him basically saying, like, okay, so you think I'm not doing enough to oppose the Nazis on my planet? Are you doing enough to oppose the Nazis on your planet? Um, was I think was like a worthy pivot there. I hope that fans don't take Augie at his word that he and the quote unquote top trio really are just essentially kaiju hunters and not supporting the regime. I think that that still seems like supporting the regime. Um, but I do think like him putting that question to the team about are you doing differently than this was cool.
that felt like an argument that more or less got dumped.
No. I mean, when they did make the decisions about whether or not they're going to go along with Argus or not, like they're reflecting on that.
Are they?
I think
Or are
so.
they? Or are they? Are I? I don't think it was there. I think that was more about Argus in the text, and I would also argue that the way that scene ended up should have led to a lot more discussion within the team, because one of the vigilantes kills that Augie before the scene can go any further.
Yeah.
That's what precipitated the brutal attack on Keith, which in this, to make sure for our listeners to remember, in this reality, Chris's brother Keith is alive and well. He finds the affection with his brother that he lost, and loses the guilt of accidentally killing him in Earth proper. But the death of this Augie short circuits a lot of that, because knowing Chris as we do up to this point, how is he not mad at both Adrians, even the one who goes back with him? How is that not friction at this point when checkmate is apparently formed, which to me struck me as a very shoddy rush of a story beat, to be honest. There's no rallying point other than boosting Chris's feelings and using Adrian's drug money. I feel like that whole sequence was very bad. I think it was aiming for, because this was a backdoor series finale, it was aiming for a feel good moment that to me was not earned. And you're right in that Augie does pose a challenge while dodging his own role in the regime, because the trio is treated with some sort of deference by that version of Argus. They work
Exactly.
for him directly.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw them take down
Yeah.
that universe's version of the kaiju from Superman, which
Yeah.
we have to believe had to have been planted by somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So, what exactly is their role within this government?
Right. It's a distraction, right? Like the government's like, yep, go fight monsters. That's why you need to come to us for support. And they're generating the monsters. It's all bred in circuses, but kaiju fighting, you know?
There's never an unpacking of Adebayo and Judo Master's encounter with that mob with the rest of the team.
Yeah, I wanted that to be like 4 times as long, that conversation between the two of them, because it was
Not just that
fabulous.
conversation, but the bringing that up to the rest of the team. And there's never an unpacking of Chris slaughtering a pack of people who we end up figuring out were actually a force for good in that planet.
Here's the complicated thing about them being a force for good. Like they were doing the DMV lady. I think it's like I think it's a discussion. Like, do we think that we trust this particular team's judgment on what appropriate use of revolutionary violence might look like? I don't know. Like it's kind
That
of
they're in resistance. They resist this regime. Adrian X is supportive of them. He might be a
yeah, but
full-fledged
it's
member,
Ad-
but again, there's
it's Adrian though.
but
Yeah.
I mean, it should be noted that both Adrians are anti-Nazi. Whatever else is
Yep.
going on with them, that struck me as a very interesting beat for him in particular, for that character in particular.
Yeah.
Um, he is
Yeah.
he's chaotic good, but he's good.
I mean, he's a sociopath, but he definitely hates Nazis.
I mean, he hates Nazis. We've yet to be seen otherwise. He targets presumably high-rolling drug operation because he didn't stick up a corner boy for that stash of money in his basement. But because of the nature of this season, serving a bigger master in the movie division, all that is gone. Instead, we leave Earth X, and it becomes about not Chris fighting the legal system all of a sudden, but Chris and the lost moment with Harcourt. And I'm delineating between Harcourt and Emilia from Earth X because, who boy, was that problematic. Um, Chris gets together with Emilia, who believes he's
Hmm.
another person. Man,
Yep.
and again, that never gets unpacked. See, to me, there was
Yeah.
just too much left on the table to really come around for me to really come around in this season, and there wasn't. It just wasn't funny enough to make up for it.
I'm very sold on Jennifer Holland based on how completely convincing she inhabited these two different versions of herself and handled her fight scenes. I was like, this is her season, you know?
Oh yeah, no,
Um,
performances are the least of my problem with this show.
yeah. Sarah Daniel Rasher, my podcast co-host for our Deep Space Dive, Deep Space Nine podcast stuff, pointed out how much Jennifer Holland's outfits in Nazi world look exactly like what the right-wing Christian Instagram influencers are wearing now. And I was like, oh my God, it is. Like they just really nailed the styling. I think like the costumer just went to some hot Christian girl autumn or whatever the fuck they're calling it, influencer Instagram page and just copied those outfits for her and just nailed it. It was not subtle, in fact, how good of an approximation the styling was. I mean, and she's less tacky than a lot of those women, but there's women like that who are not tacky. And that is exactly Jennifer Holland's styling in the Earth X version of herself. But yeah, this would not be the first time that Peacemaker like really seemed to not have thought through the implications of what he was doing on other people, and kind of yeah, regarding them as interchangeable in some ways too.
I think, and again, I will give John Cena credit that I never would have thought possible 10 years ago. Uh, I think Chris sees himself as the interchangeable piece, as an avoidance technique, as a coping technique. Just plug me in somewhere else. It has to go better, and then he finds out that nope. And you can probably imagine that maybe he would have seen the mirror on the wall in another week. Maybe Rick Flag Jr. would have said something to tip him off because he'll get it eventually. But what would have happened if he had caught on without having uh, his team around him?
As soon as you see the cheering crowds and it's all white people, like how How do you not say, what the fuck happened? What, like,
I do have a response. I do have a response there.
yes.
So the fan theory is that because Chris grew up in an all Anglo environment, it would have just taken longer to twig for him because he didn't, and he doesn't live in a big city still. He lives in what appears to be a
Yeah.
also, I will say, because I have driven through the Midwest, I have driven up and down I-10, I-40, I-35 in the course of my travels. I don't ask this accusingly. Have you ever been to Liberal, Kansas? When I was a college junior, I drove up Route 54 into Liberal, Kansas, and I stopped at a diner just to get some breakfast. And it was like a scene out of Easy Rider.
Oh my God.
Every white face in that restaurant turned and looked at me. I got my order to go.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like, that's terrifying.
I've been to Dalhart, Texas, where the hotel manager greeted me with a literal howdy.
Oh,
Um, there are towns that look like that. In fact, when Gunn has talked in interviews about a right wing backlash, I believe him. I just think it's funny because as someone who has focused on right wing disinformation throughout my career,
yeah.
the Earth X we see here seems like a gold mine for that type of propaganda operation. That city looked clean.
Mm-hmm.
That city looked very peaceful. Where I working for certain type of outlets, I would air that footage and say, I don't see what the problem here is.
Right.
Everybody here looks like they're having fun. We don't know what Adebayo did. Maybe this Earth's version of her did commit a crime.
My God. It's so real. Yeah. No, you nailed it.
So yeah, I don't. I do. Like I said, I do think Chris would have gotten her eventually. Uh, I can imagine the scene where he's just walking through the office and has a coffee, and then he spots the mural.
I just am not, even in a season that's really committed to um establishing Chris and Lee Adebayo's relationship as like best friends in a meaningful way. I see him hesitating on making a decision that he's gonna leave Nazi world where his dad loves him and his brother's alive. Like, I really do. And the fact that he does, you could say that a piece of that is that he is queer. And it's interesting.
A bisexual icon.
Exactly. It's interesting how the show handles this. I was very impressed with the multigender, body diverse orgy happening in Chris's living room. I thought that was great. I know that folks are sort of critical with how that aspect of his life is couched as being part of his like debauchery, but I'm like, I kind of think it's more the orgy and less the being bi thing. And I think it's actually shown the fact that he's checked out from the orgy is the sign that something's wrong, not the fact that there is an orgy, you know? Like, it signals more that like the fact that there's this orgy at his house and he can't even get into it because he's that disturbed. That's the sign that there's a problem, not the orgy itself.
Because he was so checked out, it actually took me a second to realize that was in the dream sequence. I thought that was meant to symbolize him numbing himself,
mm,
and then come to realize that, oh, those are actual people. But then I wondered, well, wait a minute. I get that Chris is depressed, but he had to know somebody to get this set up. Even if he just went on an app and swiped on the right person.
yeah.
The fact that he seemingly had no familiarity with anybody who was there. And I'm not talking even romantically. I get that he would have a slam piece, sure. But yeah, that was my only hitch. But the scene itself I thought was tremendous.
I was really proud of the show. And I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think maybe some of the actors were like gender diverse. Like there's a lot. I mean, I don't want to like investigate individual people, but I thought that was cool to have the show commit to that.
And the fact that the scene framed the shot of himself with a feminine mask, both necking him, and it was framed. I don't feel it was set up in an exploitative
Yeah.
manner. Um, it was set up like this is happening, and it's just part of what happens at an orgy. I heard.
I thought that was nicely done. So yeah, like I think like is a world where Chris like this decides he's going to leave Nazi world is a world where Chris is like, yeah, I'm not straight. And I really did appreciate that line from him in, I guess it was episode 1, where he's like dealing with the Justice Gang, and
he's complaining they insulted him by talking about his dick sucking. I'm proud, and he's proud of his dick
he's
sucking.
like, that's not a put down, that's a fucking compliment. I'm like, God bless.
Can we hang back on that Justice Gang scene for a moment?
Yes, let's do that. Poor White Rabbit.
White Rabbit won.
That's the superhero win in the bunny costume who was crying on her way out of the audition. Yes, what were you going to say?
To me, that scene crystallized the theme of the season. Because this was James Gunn attempting to marry his we'll call it trauma-friendly sensibilities, albeit of a progressive nature politically,
Sure.
with the larger machine of the DC universe that he has to rebuild now.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, not the confrontation, but the scene between you've got Chris there, who last season was snarky and dismissive of the Justice Gang. Now, very much the somehow politically incorrect and progressive all at the same time. Um, and he's confronted by Guy Gardner, who has very much taken his place as the scimitar of snark in this setup now.
For folks who don't know, he's one of the Green Lanterns, and he's the Green Lantern that no one likes. I mean, people like him in the sense that they like the character as the unlikable one, but he's basically the Green Lantern hero who is the unlikable one, and that's the one we've seen in Superman, and now in this series.
And James Gunn and Nathan Fillion both have gone on record with saying, if because the Green Lantern is a multi-planetary police force, Guy's the one you don't call if you can help it.
Yeah.
But yet, and this is where this is where this is where Gunn's writing undercut the work in Superman, as frankly loathsome as Guy is thus far. He still responded to Superman's call. And he still responded and protected innocent townspeople in the face of a military invasion.
Yep. He's not all bad.
In that same movie, when we saw Chris, he was in a nationally televised political program. And was he giving Superman the benefit of the doubt? No, he was not. He was all too glad to pile on and deride Superman and metahumans in general.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, he was really being a piece of shit. I had not really grasped onto that, but you're right. Actually, as an aside, one of the only performances here that I didn't love was Rick Flag Sr. I had really high hopes, and he ended up being like okay, I guess, which maybe it was only because I had really high hopes that I found it disappointing. But anyway, the fact that Rick Flag Sr. initially begins feeling completely contemptuous of Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is a piece of shit. He doesn't want to have to work with him. And then he ends up working with him. And then Lex Luthor's people fully insinuate themselves into Argus was such a good touch. Like how he goes from being against him to like having the same goals as Lex. And Lex Luthor's men start taking over the agency from the inside. Felt very real to the way corporations' involvement in government undermines government, and how the priorities change to get taken over by these kinds of personalities, and his position on everything sort of shifts, other than continuing to hate Chris.
Captain America: The Winter Soldier says, "First time." I agree. That was a good beat. As someone who watched a little bit of Creature Commandos, mm-hmm. You can see the arc downward for Flag Senior. Even after he gets what you would think would be the cathartic moment of literally beating Chris, thanks to his power now, thanks to his having the resources of Lex Luthor behind him, as you said, he just further descends. So, and I mentioned this to you, I think, before we began broadcasting. Gunn had said in the past that there was material involving Amanda Waller, traditionally the big bad of the espionage world, but it just didn't get to him on time. And in this particular case, I think it ended up being a blessing in disguise, because a more puffed out Rick Flag Sr. as an antagonist can pay dividends. Can pay dividends.
And my dividends. Yeah. I I just don't know. I thought he was so good in the animated series, and I don't know.
With the character or the performance, I guess.
Sorry, the character and the performance were really good in the animated series, and I felt that in Peacemaker, it felt like a Berlanti guy acting job in this, basically.
I do love how Berlanti is derogatory for you, but to me it's become um I don't know. I was a Berlanti-verse person,
Huh?
uh, and I say this as someone who said "damn it, Barry" every week watching The Flash. I thought I was fine with Frank Grillo to dealing with Argus. To me, what fell short of expectations was uh Sol Rodriguez. I don't think she had enough to do with Sasha Bordeaux,
Mm.
who, if your character, she has a history in the Batman side of things. She was a former love interest of Bruce Wayne, even, and she was even let in on the secret. But here she's a cyborg.
I appreciated her face turn. We should talk about Tim Meadows as Agent Fleury because that was out of control. The part must have been written for him. He's so deliciously terrible, and I can imagine him having the time of his fucking life. You could just see that.
I think Meadows had fun. My read on him was someone who also puffed out his own chest to show dominance in a work setting. And then
Mhm.
that moment where he tells economists that he was right to raise a flag on the treatment of Smith, that was him. Like that was the actual him. And among the characters who I felt we could have gotten more time with to really develop or to really get a better gauge on what he's about, he was definitely there.
The whole bird blindness gag, like you feel that has to have come from some improv or something. It's so ridiculous and bizarre, and yet it's pivotal. Like it's a pivotal plot point, so it didn't come from an improv. You know what I mean?
That was the only saving grace of the whole Eagly subplot, which to me that from what has come out in Gunn's post game podcast, which are more informative than the norm for that type of show. The actor who was originally cast as Michael Rooker's character, Red Saint Wild,
Okay.
much like the original Vigilante last year, they filmed a lot of material with Red Saint Wild, and then Gunn changed his mind for whatever reason and brought Michael Rooker on to take over the role and essentially redo that subplot. And like to me as a someone who's watched baseball, I just felt like why do you have Michael Rooker here basically pitching middle relief? He wasn't the payoff of Eagly having these apparent powers just wasn't enough for me.
Be curious what an indigenous response is to that character because I feel like there's getting to be a shortcut where like the way you can tell a joke about indigenous people is to have it not actually be an indigenous person and have it be a white person pretending to be indigenous because that is something that happens a lot and is contemptible and so is something where there's like an appetite for jokes about it. But
Yeah, it seemed like it was just there to let Michael Rooker vamp for a
yeah,
few minutes when I think we could have spent that time with Agent Fleury or Agent Bordeaux, or the other agents of those ill-fated missions to other dimensions.
these are such scummy people though. That's the thing. Like I this the vibe from all of the other agents you see from Argus
I mean,
is like these are like scummy people.
again, I that's kind of the vibe in this show in general. It's
Mm,
like
yeah.
you're cute. Everyone's a little bit racist or dumb as a brick. Kind of a scuzzy place to be. To go back for a second, we see the Justice Gang trying to recruit new members. First of all, never mind, they just killed a sitting head of state. Two, they're in some podunk theater, and Maxwell Lord can't figure out an audio setup. Like that again, that
Yeah.
was another like that's not.
Oh, I love these. That just that sort of petty anti bullshit feels real to
But
me.
that's not.
Like you could totally see
But
that.
again, to me, and this is where my own complete streak comes in. That was a good reference. That if you're trying to approximate the 1980s Justice League International, it works. That wasn't the Maxwell Lord we saw in Superman. So now, like again, and if you're coming from that movie to try out the show, I wouldn't have been like I can see if you were saying like what is it? What? It's a good bit. that I think Gunn got too excited about, and it messed with his own characterizations of these characters.
I like the, but I just think that like, yes, they killed a head of state and now they like don't have a good setup for their hiring processes. Like that feels like, yeah, like they got shunted down a level.
But
Um,
Hawk Girl's around.
well,
She's
yes,
there.
because they're going to
She's
cover it
done.
up. It's going to be covered up that she did that or some, you know what I mean? Like it feels like, oh, they're going to paper. I mean, people do all kinds of crazy shit and just walk around in real life, in the real world,
Yep.
and then even more so in the DC universe.
Where does a Latina get away with that?
Ooh, point taken. Point taken. So oh, so just to put a final note on the bit about Fleury, though, the whole bit about bird blindness. I don't, just recently there was that whole thing with Graham Platter, and people started trying to convince themselves that they couldn't tell the difference between different kinds of skull drawings. It was like, oh, you guy couldn't tell you if it was Grateful Dead Steal Your Face or a Nazi skull. We're like, really? And shout out to one of my social media mutuals, Ron Hogan. I basically written, I'd shown a picture with the Steal Your Face next to the Totenkopf and said, visual illiteracy is clearly a problem. And Ron Hogan responded, okay, you obviously have not read my dossier. I have skull blindness. I can't tell the difference between one kind of skull and another. And it was a much better phrenology joke, in fact,
Oh,
because those white supremacist people are always right
right.
doing some sort of phrenology bullshit. I'm glad we got at least a laugh out of it.
There was few and far between just because of what this show had to do.
Few and far between what?
Laugh wise,
Oh,
unless like the positioning of Adrian this year and Economist to a certain degree was clearly set up as the comic relief. But for me, they both faltered.
mm. I mean, I feel like Economos actually got a good storyline. I know we disagree about this. I felt like Economos got to develop a sense of, I don't know, greater braveness and demonstrate having a greater braveness and stronger ethics than he'd had throughout the earlier season. So I actually thought it was a good season for him. So you felt like the jokes are too few and far between.
Yeah,
I
and
noted.
again, for the function of this series, I can't, or this season, I should say, I kind of get it. And when you asked me how I would rank the season, I came out thinking it did better as a setup point than as a season of standalone television because the closing sequence of the show, the final, like not the happy ending, but the actual closing sequence where everything gets pulled out, from under Chris's feet, that was very effective.
So we do want to, you had other thoughts about the conversation between Judo Master and Lee and how that set up for the ending.
I like that scene. I really like that moment of connection.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I don't feel that Judo Master joining the team was quite earned was quite simply because when the 11th Street kids finally confront Argus, Judo Master still walks over to the Argus side. So we never, to me, I felt the show, that part of the show, that the show should have ended on the pitches to Flurry and Judo Master at the beginning of the formation of Checkmate, instead of suddenly they're in a suburban office, which is horrible
Yeah.
for which what I imagine is, if not heroes for hire, then a competing intelligence operation.
Yeah, it was very strange physical setup. But Checkmate is ridiculous. I mean, this is something actually Spencer Acker and Min and I were talking about when he was on to talk about Amanda Waller versus Wildstorm on my podcast a while back, which was just like DC has so many intelligence agencies. DC Comics loves that kind of spy drama in a way that Marvel hasn't really invested in at the same level. And I mean, if you take it on its surface, Checkmate is ridiculous. Spencer did not say that. Let me be clear. For all I know, he may end up writing Checkmate one day, but I think Checkmate is ridiculous. But like, why not? Who cares?
Where's Director Bones?
Oh, I mean, actually, one of the things that I'm really hung up on, actually, speaking of people who are ridiculous, is Vigilante in this season. I thought that the humor of the character became too one note, and the guy who was so like dedicated to his friend that he like literally got himself sent to prison to break his friend out of prison was just kind of missing from this until we get to that great stuff that they did in the parallel world. And one thing I feel like I haven't seen people remark on is when our world's vigilante goes into his parallel world house and he's observing all the minor differences and chuckling about how bizarre they are. Cheerios is spelled a little bit different, this, that, the other. He chuckles and he goes, "Oh, I guess my dad's not gay because my parents are still together." And he keeps walking and talking. So then when he said that, my eyebrow raised a little bit. But then, of course, in short order, we learned this is the Nazi universe. So then it's just like, yeah, your dad actually is still gay. He's just closeted. And everything about that is a million times more depressing now, isn't it?
Right. And I mentioned this before, but I do think it's a funny bit to bring up. There apparently was a version of that scene where Adrian is walking through the Earth X version of his house, and his mom is making out with their version of John, stimulating the local economist, you might say.
That feels like so much less of something meaningful than to like, even though like it feels like nobody else noticed the implications of the fact that in this world your dad is closeted and sad. Like, that just like, I don't know, it feels like a shock effect. What I'm trying to say is, even though it seems like nobody else noticed the political implications of this, I would prefer the political implications that I just discussed existing in the series over whatever kind of shock value there would have been of having Economos making out with Vigilante's mom.
I agree. And that was a good beat to add to the mounting horror of everyone discovering where they are.
I just wish they'd come back to be like, oh, I guess my dad is really sad then, and it's bad that everybody is fucking closeted in Nazi world.
And maybe Adrian eventually gets that. But
Yeah.
but I do agree with you. What we saw this year would not have allowed him that space. Because
Yep.
again, it's remarkable to me that both Adrians have such a clearly defined moral system, despite their sociopathic nature, that they grok what's going on, and they are repulsed by this notion of this take on authority.
I mean, our Adrian does not notice what's going on, but when he's clued in, he responds properly, you know?
I mean, when he dealt with Augie 1 last year, there was I was impressed. There was no hesitation. So yeah,
Yep.
I agree with you that what they had him do this year, I don't know, there was a lot more to do there. And I saw fans theorizing online, in fact, that when they escape Earth X, it's that Adrian who comes back and our Adrian who stays, and people were wishing for that just so at least one of them could have something to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's not his series, and like he's going to be a one note kind of a thing, but I could definitely see that having been the case. Definitely.
And I mean, you're right. It's not a show, but there's room for that. There's a lot more to do with that character, I feel. And on a were this show in the Berlantiverse, I would argue that they would have pushed a little further with him.
Mm. In what way?
He would have got just more to do. As messy as those shows could be, they ran long enough and had enough episodes that just about every major character gets pushed, gets forced to evolve, changes their role in the operation. I mean, the Flash team went through like 3-4 leadership changes throughout the course of the run, and because it was as much about them learning to work in the superheroic field as anything else. And
Got it.
like I said before, if this had been a season 2 to prepare for a season 3, there was a lot of stuff you could have done with both Adrian and John. Which, small moment that I haven't seen anyone touch on. John's asleep in the tub, and Adrian just gives him a nice kiss on the forehead. we talk about the Adrian and Chris dynamic, but Adrian cares about John.
Only in ways that John would find irritating. But yes.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one humor beat that did work for me, despite the fact that it's the kind of thing that I normally would find very upsetting, is every time the alien shows up in the dimension and essentially throws a cat weasel in an incinerator as if it's like taking out the garbage. That's just fucking hilarious to me. Sort of perfunctoriness of its gestures.
Right. And
It's just like, oh yes, time to take out the garbage, by which I mean throw a cat weasel incinerator. And the freaking Santa's line read be like an asshole. It was like really good. He never says hi to me.
I mean, it was first off, I mean, throwing him into the opening dance montage, just setting everybody on for disappointment. But I kind of gave up the ghost on that character have anything to do, which at least he wasn't sacrificed, or at least they weren't sacrificed to Argus.
That is true. Oh, yeah, and I thought that the way that they were sort of showed the attrition and exploitation of the Argus workers in that montage was nicely done, in fact. Like, there's a lot of just like, hey, these agencies are fucked, and this is a meat grinder, and these powerful people do not give a fuck about the people who work for them. Gets really hammered home,
Yeah.
effectively.
Yeah, and it dovetailed nicely with Flag becoming at least some things he hates, because he's not, because Flag very much presented himself as an actual patriot, someone who actually cared about serving the public, and here he is, descending further in with moneyed interests.
Yep. And sleeping with a subordinate also. Like, he's just really falling off.
Yeah, and his son would have been offended by that.
Yes. Yes. I mean, everything that Flag says he's doing for his son are things that his son would have objected to, which I think is good characterization. Like, I think that's interesting. That I think that's interesting. Like, everything he does, his son would have objective to it. And it feels funny because it's like following orders and killing his son seems like that's what Rick Flag Sr. would have thought he was supposed to do, even, just fucking following orders. But let's talk about Salvation. You have thoughts?
The closing sequence where Chris gets rounded up in the dark of night was very well done. That to me was not quite a saving grace, but it did, at least to me, it's that the show stuck that landing. I do have questions about what Gunn and DC are willing to pay to do with this version of Salvation. Gunn has already publicly dispelled the idea that we're going to see the Joker, for example. If you're not aware, in the original Salvation run, it was a prison planet explicitly set up for DC's metacriminal population. And it led to everyone from Luthor and the Joker to Flash's Rogues Gallery to all sorts of A and B and C-list villains getting marooned there. And eventually, of course, it becomes a Lord of the Flies situation. Here, also, Gunn has dispelled the notion that those were parademons you heard at the end of the show. Which it would.
Oh, I was wondering about those.
Which I heard people wondering whether this would be lead to a signaling of Darkseid. So unless Gunn is lying for the sake of secrecy, that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, I don't feel like he's been deliberately misleading people. It feels kind of cheap. I mean, I think that a show, I would be curious to see what this series does and has to say about prison as a theme, I mean, I think he's willing to go there with like a critique of the prison system, certainly. And
well,
I don't know. I think it could be, no?
Disagreement there is not really with you. It's that this show is over. Peacemaker as a series is done. Maybe we get a Checkmate show. But, Salvation will figure in the movies. And Gunn has said in a Q&A that he's not expecting people to go into Superman Man of Tomorrow, the next film in that series, and already know what Salvation is, which is why I said at the outset, this season is skippable, because you're going to get informed on Salvation anyway.
Yeah, but like I don't watch shit to be completist. Like you watch it because it's interesting, you know.
Fair, but I mean, there's people who listen to this show who are completists, so I feel I'm just giving them the heads up.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm sure that he'll do the homework so people don't have to. Like it would be bad if he said, in order to watch the next movie, you have to have watched the Peacemaker series. Like that would be a bad way to run the studio, you know. Um, but that doesn't mean that that there's no reason to watch the show. Like you should watch the show for the pleasure of watching the show, or not, you know. Um, And I think like one of the big themes from last season, you know, had so much to do, season one was very much about the trouble with our constructions of masculinity and the damage that it does to people. And I thought that that theme was not abandoned here. Like it was less of a focus, but it did continue. And it sort of existed in this question of like Chris's self loathing and the different ways that manifests itself and the difference between that and Harcourt's own self-loathing as well, and her inability to express herself through anything other than violence. Um, like it was actually sort of treating her concerns and trauma seriously, and it hadn't forgotten or acted as though he had worked out all of his shit either.
You know, there was also the moment when Harcourt is in a store and she has a disagreement with the cashier, and there's a beat where she's at the door, walking out of the out of the store, and she just kind of looks over at the worker. And I thought that was to me, that was an interesting moment because the parallel there is that uh, Harcourt is very good at what she does, but she's blackballed out of the industry, and she doesn't know what to do with all of her talents. And I'm not just talking about fighting, analysis, uh, you know, she's basically in a burn notice situation without having anybody to pay her to do good. Um, and I mean that, like I said, that's the version of this season that uh, I feel a loss in, and that there was a question of what does Chris really want to do? Why does he want to join the Justice Gang just to be a quote unquote a hero? Last season he was dissing these people. Um, you know, Chris is smart enough that he could do any number of jobs if he wanted to help. Chris could be a trucker. Chris could be a youth football coach. Chris could do a lot of things. What does he want? That was in a show that again in a show that is about him and his friends to prepare for season three. There's room to dig into those questions. We just did not have that room here. That's Gunn's choice. And but we can't say we didn't lose a lot of those questions with Chris and Harcourt behind.
I thought like addressing how traumatic it would be for him to go through what he's been going through with his family members, um, and how much he blames himself. I was glad that they didn't act like that was all just sort of wrapped up, over and done, you know, just because there was a conclusion to last season.
There is that. Then I also thought we sped through, uh, Chris has just seen the quote unquote good version of his father get stabbed in the neck, and his
By his best friend.
my
Yeah. Or former, really.
or I mean one of a part of his or
A close friend.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and his group of friends has named the good version of his brother. Um, and we do see how he volunteers to go to jail out of self-loathing, but then the resolution there is so speedy, like it threw me. Seemingly as soon as Harcourt confirms that she had feelings for him or still does, that all gets swept away. And then we're at the Nelson show, or or the is it Foxy Shazam? We're at the Foxy Shazam show.
Yes. Yeah. The Nelson show was the show that they went to in their non-date date.
Right.
And the Foxy Shazam show was the show at the climax.
And I Nelson was a hell of a choice for a number of reasons. Because do you remember how they were received?
Yeah. Everybody hated Nelson. Oh, sorry. For those who are unfamiliar, Nelson was a pop rock band that was featured the sons of Ricky Nelson, who was a 50s heartthrob musician and actor. And they were very polished, marketed, very much an aesthetic in how they were pitched to the public. They both had very beautiful, straight, long blonde hair, very like model-esque kind of like wholesome look guys. And they were really popular, and they were very critically, like, just could not be more looked down on by serious rock fans, by critics, by anybody who took themselves seriously. Like, Nelson was for girls, and things that are for girls are bad, as we all know is universally true. I will admit that I was not a fan of Nelson.
And
They do dress like anime princesses,
they did.
which we didn't know at the time.
Right, they did, which we did not know at the time. Like it's not till I watched like Escaflowne that I was like, oh, that's what that was.
Yeah, like as a child at the time, I was unfamiliar with anime princess, but you're right, that is how they dressed. But yeah, they were very maligned, very maligned. So I thought that, it's one thing to rehabilitate the impression of Hanoi Rocks, who were a band that people who knew about music did respect if they knew enough to know more than just like, oh, hey, didn't those guys have that one MTV song? Yes, they did have more than that one MTV song. Yeah, they actually were pretty influential, especially abroad and then in the LA scene, because they were like a big influence on what has happened on the Sunset Strip. But like, Hanoi Rocks is like, to the extent that anybody liking any form of glam metal can be considered socially acceptable, which is speaking as a fan of glam metal, is considered very little. Like, they're more respectable, but nobody respects Nelson. Nobody. And that was fascinating for them to go right to Nelson as the band for this. And I respect that.
Nelson also had more than one song. The video for their second single, After the Rain, I vividly remember that MTV special, the what they called the 20 worst music videos ever, and these are all songs that MTV had featured in its rotation. So they turned their backs on all of these artists, and they went so far as that with After the Rain, they trashed what they claimed was the master tape on camera. And this wasn't just the regular jocks. This show had Jon Stewart, Janine Garofalo, Dennis Leary, Chris Kattan, four New York City cool comedians roasting these shit out of Nelson and Vanilla Ice and Gerardo and all these artists that MTV had formerly doted on.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I've written about, and basically any time that I've written about glam metal is the way like MTV built it up and MTV took it out. It assassinated its own thing and convinced people that they didn't like something which they liked. Like, and people were like, okay, I guess I agree with you. You tell me. But yeah, like I think it was really bold it was a very bold choice for Peacemaker to go with Nelson. And I'll say their live performance, or quote unquote live, what have you, as appearing on the TV show was like, shit, that's a good song. They still sound great. Good for them. Like, when you hear what fucking Vince Neil sounds like.
Sure, I'm not going to defend that.
Right? From Motley Crue. So many people sound terrible now because they didn't have vocal coaching to teach them how to preserve their singing voices. I mean, the Nelsons always had a clean vocal style, which is easier to preserve than doing that kind of like screech vocals that like Motley Crue did. But I was impressed at how well preserved their, perform as singers and guitarists. Nelson still came off in this.
Three things. One, I watched footage of Motley Crue performing at the US Fest in I think 81, 82. Vince sounded like shit then. Vince sounded like shit.
Oh yeah, that was Mark. That was also mic'd really, really badly. But they also, yes, I had posted some of that actually, but you can also tell when the monitors kick in, which is not to say that I'm just blaming monitors, but like you can literally tell when the monitors kick in because it goes from like, oh my God, that's bad to like, oh, it's okay. In my opinion,
the song that the Nelsons did, and I mean, I'm glad they're still around. They're doing a lot better than the vast majority of the contemporaries did, health-wise, apparently. It reminded me of remember that, remember when Bon Jovi started pivoting to country? That was the vibe that I got.
Everybody did that. Like, everybody from that whole crew decided that they were going to go country in like the 90s. And if you think about the audience, like who's the audience for this music, it kind of makes sense that they would. I mean, like Bon Jovi doing Dead or Alive and Young Guns and all that. But like, Dokken decided they were cowboys. Like everybody decided they were a cowboy in about 1990, right? And the whole scene was about to end. So I'm not surprised if Nelson continued being
I
in
mean, it
that
was a county
direction.
fairish situation.
Because yeah.
It fit the venue. But three, like, I had a second of hope that the incident was going to be that Hardcore like knocked one of them out, and that would have been the problem, and that would have popped me. That would have made me laugh.
Yeah. That would have totally, yeah, that would have been cute. But I liked that. I was impressed. Like I had been wondering this whole time, like, yeah, what is it that happened at the concert? They build it up, the unclarity and the anticipation throughout the whole season. And then what they ended up doing, I thought was like kind of interesting. That ultimately, what is the drama? That drama is that she actually let her guard down at all, briefly, and how hard that is for her to have done and to come to terms with, even in as minor of a way as it was there,
And related to that, like the one gag that really I did not like, the psychologist telling her, she suffered from a form of toxic masculinity. That was such a cheap gag.
Yeah. But I also could see that being said though by psychologist who was like assigned to like undermine her careers.
I don't know. It's a go-to cheap gag for creative folks to undermine journalists and therapists. So that was one where I felt we could have gotten more. We could have gotten more punch out of the therapist actually giving her good advice, and then she's still struggling with that.
Like, why would they have given her good advice if the whole point is they're trying to keep her blackballed? Like, she's not going to a therapist of her own volition. She's getting like screened by the government.
You always need a weapon. I mean, if you keep her, which you'd think even Flag would have been like, I could use her as an asset later. So you want to keep her engaged until she has to be productive, or she can be applied somewhere.
I mean, I agree with you that there is a tendency in pop culture to dismiss therapists as being universally bad at their jobs and shitty and this and that. But like, there is a plot load-bearing reason why we need her to have a bad experience with that therapist. That's just my analysis from that exchange there. And then I think the idea that like she is processing her self-loathing through violence is
compelling, and that's typically a guy beat.
Believable, Yep. And like there's no reason that it has to be, and I thought it was a interesting way to have Chris like be like, I actually do understand what you're going through, because he's someone who's actually dealt with this too,
But yeah,
I think it sets up a better reason for them to connect. I kind of, at the end of season 1, I really should have go back and listened to my own episode, but I feel like I kind of was a little bit like, about having them set up as a couple, because you just sort of don't like how they're like, here's a stereotypically attractive man and a stereotypically attractive woman, and they have friends with each other, and therefore they should be a couple. I resent that so much as a person who has many friends of many genders. But dealing with this particular emotional beat for her made me feel invested in them as a couple, as a potential couple in the series, in a way that I had not been before.
Part of me wishes that Chris had a male suitor or someone male who piqued his interest, but we're probably not going to get that in this, in a Warner Brothers property. As it is, we lucked out with Adebayo and her wife,
because it's like
which I do want to touch on.
Yeah, well, she's not a superhero,
right? But I do want to give credit to that scene that where Adebayo realizes that she can't make her wife happy. That was one of the many tremendous moments Danielle Brooks had this season.
Yeah, no, it did. I mean, it's a weird moment because at first you're sort of like, wait, is she choosing her like best friend over her spouse? But actually, no, she's choosing herself, is what she's doing. She's choosing to prioritize her own dreams, which, maybe they weren't what she thought they had been, but that's what they were at that point. It would be cool to definitely be cool to have like an actual, a male bi character in a relationship with a man in a superhero property. Yes. We shouldn't be begging for scraps at this point. This is true. But Vigilante is a cartoon character. They're not going to make that a thing. And there didn't have another character introduced. I mean, actually, there could be Judo Master. So I take that back.
And I think Judo Master can do better.
I take it back. They don't have the balls for it, but there's the reality, Judo Master, the actor had such a great quote. He described his character as a demonic twink, and I'm like, yeah, that's fair enough.
Suddenly, I'm thinking, where's Joseph Wilson, Jericho?
Oh my gosh. Well, speaking of demonic twinks, but yeah, it's like only dating people who are a terrible idea, people with very serious issues.
I ask you a question.
Yes,
Now, we
sure.
talked about salvation. And in this version, it's going to be metahumans, not just villains. Do you feel Gunn can navigate that?
Yes. I mean, based on how well he handled making Superman about Gaza without making it be like anti-Semitic, which would have been really easy to have that happen. I'm like, sure, you can go and deal with concentration camps, buddy. I suppose you can do that now. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm not going to be anxious about it, but like, I have reason to believe he could, you know? And certainly, I mean, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about actually here. Is like, you already see here the implications, people getting kidnapped and put places, right? Like, we have that in Earth X. We know that what they've done is they've kidnapped everybody of color and they're in slave camps in that parallel world. And then again, they like black bag out, kidnap Peacemaker in our world and act like that's just like a normal thing to do. And it's like, yeah, they're grabbing people from the street in the real world and putting real people in the real world in concentration camps right now. So it's like material that people should be talking about in media. What do you think?
To me,
No?
it depends a lot on how much time it's going to get. Because if Man of Tomorrow ends up being a modern riff on The Longest Yard, for example, Prison Break movie with Superman, and what I believe will end up happening is that Clark and Lex end up in jail together or on salvation together and have to figure their way out. Now, if it ends there, then maybe we all take the W and Gunn avoid some really uncomfortable conversations. However, or a returning Waller decides to pick it up again, then to me, the choice of avenue will matter a lot. And how much time can you really put into dealing with that?
And can you make it satisfying with the limited amount of space that there is in a
or
movie?
or even a short TV season, because if it's about metahumans, that's a lot to put in visually, artistically, and we still even know the expanse of metahumans really in this universe. We've only seen a few.
Yeah, like how many people there are. Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of balls in the air with this, which is why I'm surprised that it is metahumans. I'm surprised it's not just villains. You would think that they would have given themselves some wiggle room.
Especially because there's no metahumans in this show other than Sasha, who's like a cyborg because she would be like in a bionic woman situation. She became cybernetic so she wouldn't die, basically. Right. So you get the sense that there's a bajillion people running around either. So I wonder if they had always had that idea in mind, or if it came out of the movie, because there's so few superpowered people in Peacemaker. It gives you the sense that there probably aren't that many of them,
We're coming off a movie where Luthor is literally operating his own secret prison. So this is directly in conversation with that.
Mm-hmm. And he gets away with it because the people he's imprisoning are basically considered non-people to him.
So
which is awfully real and consistent. Again, this is all real shit, I mean, I'm glad he's going there. If you're going to have big, expensive tools, you should use them to do something real.
But again, I want to see what Man of Tomorrow ends up being before, and that'll tell the tale.
So I'm going to take us over to some listener questions at this point. I think you saw the ones that came to us from our friends on Blue Sky. And we can start with those then. Okay, so we got a question from Slam Campbell of the Is It Camp podcast. I do endorse their show. Should this series continue and the way it's structured and written, what obscure hero or villain or both would you like to see crop up and get their moment in the sun on this show, but you think would actually push the narrative or characters in a compelling direction? I'll let you start.
A lot to choose from, but I just went with my gut. Blue Devil.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, tell our listeners more.
Blue Devil, Dan Cassidy, is a hero who dates back, I want to say, to the 80s. He was a special effects creator, a stuntman, who ends up getting welded to a full body, literal Blue Devil costume. And through through a good amount of mystic yah-yah, just ends up stuck in this form. But he was a working class guy who ends up in these extraordinary situations. I think what Gunn is constructing could use someone who's an actual good person, and someone who can speak a little more to the working class experience. Because I think he comes at it from a different standpoint than Chris. Dan seems relatively well adjusted by comparison. But he's a creative person. I like that he was just what a wrestling fan would just call a good old fashioned baby face. They don't have to be all edgy.
Interesting. Well, my mind, of course, went to Secret Six characters because my mind always go to Secret Six characters. It's unfortunate that we already wasted Deadshot. Deadshot is a truly great character. Will Smith was a great casting choice for the character. And then they go and they use him in the really shitty Suicide Squad movie that nobody cares about. So we will not get him again. But maybe there would be another way to bring him back. I don't know. I think that there are aspects of Catman as written by Gail Simone in Suicide Squad that have some shared territory with Chris Smith here. He doesn't have the same orientation towards patriotic jingoism bullshit and rule following, because Catman has always been a villain, but they have sort of some of the similar complexes and personal crises. They're both bi. And I think that they might be interesting to have them interact.
Catman's just kind of a fun character to have around as a shit disturber.
Yes, cats do like to knock things over. Yeah, so Catman would be interesting. I think that, kind of somebody like Jeanette, the Banshee, if we were going to go into some superpowered stuff, she is literally a Banshee. The Gail Simone and Nicola Scott character from Secret Six, who literally is from the French Revolution, and is very powerful and really bitchy, I think is someone who would be great to have on the Salvation. If the story continues on that prison planet, we've seen her do some amazing stuff in context of other stories that involve prisons, and she has interesting, complicated feelings about them and about death. So if it's going to be on Salvation, I feel like Jeanette would be cool to have there. In terms of who would be cool to include in a Checkmate squad, though.
Ooh, a Checkmate. Let's see.
Anybody else come to mind for you? Right? Because that's what they're going to be doing. So
I guess it depends what they're going to be doing. Are they there to counter Argus? Are they there as a heroes for hire, or super buddies?
It seems like it's a heroes
Well,
for hire kind of a
then
setup. Yeah.
they
Like
need some
that's
more
yeah.
heroes. They need, let's see.
I mean, Catman, actually does work into that too.
I'm trying to think of someone who's malleable enough to work
Um,
for. Oh, well, I mean, I imagine we're going to get Booster Gold anyway, but that would be a prime.
yeah, Booster Gold is such like John Cena could have played Booster
Yep.
Gold in another world. Like that would have been a great casting choice for him. Um, he is Booster Gold, listeners, if you're unfamiliar, is the only superhero who would rescue you and then make you watch an infomercial about how great it is to be rescued by him. And you, the viewer or reader, finds it hilarious and not awful. I mean, it's obnoxious, but it's funny.
I mean, let's go back to the 80s JLI. Let's pluck some characters out of there. At this point, I think you're better off starting with Mary Marvel as someone who's an ingenue, as someone who's new to the whole scene. Um, we talked about Booster. I think if we're going to bring back Jaime Reyes, I think he'd be a great addition here.
With the alien powers and stuff like that. I I think that James Gunn's type of humor could be interesting to have go through. Like I don't think we've really seen James Gunn handle a teenager, but that could be interesting. And I heard that I didn't actually see the Blue Beetle movie, but I heard it was
Decent, yeah.
good.
I mean, it was a good starting point. This Jamie is easy to root for. And that at that point, that's really all I wanted. All I wanted.
Yeah. For like folks who don't know, Jaime Reyes is like in a way kind of DC Comics answered to like a new updated Spider-Man, but he's like a Latino teenager in the Southwest. But he has a lot of Spider-Man characteristics basically going on with his personality and the predicaments of his teenage life.
If you watch the Young Justice animated show, there's a lot you can do with Jaime there. So I think throwing him in the context of
Yeah.
dealing with not just superhero as a job, but working with this batch of people. Uh,
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that the show would let them have a teenager go and interact with the adults in this kind of
I don't want to
scenario.
sound too much like a prude, but I have a friend or two who I do talk about this stuff on a week to week basis for, not for a podcast, but just our own chats. They've got to start bringing some younger characters into this thing, because one of the strengths of the pre WB, or pre, let's say even the 2000s, 90s and 2000s, the animated line was great if you wanted something for younger viewers to enjoy.
Yeah.
Beyond Justice
Yeah.
League. And now currently we have My Adventure with Superman, which is tremendous. And we're getting a Jessica Crew Green Lantern show, which
Yeah.
I'm also anticipating. But on the live action side, you've got to get some kids in there, or something kids friendly.
I agree with you, but that's not going to be in Peacemaker because that is their like adult thing. You know what I mean? Because like
I
they can
mean,
get away with it's like because it's a HBO show, so they can.
yeah. Well, but again, that show is over. There's room to tweak it with a Checkmate show.
I see. Yeah, I guess I just figure like that's going to be the role of it would be to be the adult rated R, dark,
I mean,
violent, maybe not super
Gunn
powered.
has hedged his bets. He said that Checkmate will pop up. It's a matter of where.
Mm,
Uh, so
got it.
again, I mean, if you assume the same rating as Superman, there's room for a younger hero there that you can spin off into a
Okay.
separate project. This take on Supergirl is not going to be it.
So, Arturo, let our listeners know where they can keep up with your work.
I mean, the best place to find me these days is on Blue Sky, A Boy Named Art. Just look me up there. I don't share a lot of hot takes. Just to tell you in advance, I like to retweet relevant news items or share calls for mutual aid. Not in the media space at the moment. If anyone's looking for a good reporter or editor, hit me up.
That's true. They should. They should hit you up. And they can follow you on a boy named Art, like a boy named Sue, but it's a boy named Art over on Blue Sky. As for me, also on Blue Sky, Levin. I'm probably going to be launching my own website soon. I guess you guys heard it here first, so that'll be a whole thing for me. Um, Yeah, I know. I'm gonna just bite the bullet and make it happen. Not like, and I'll get you guys a link there too. And I might put this in the beginning of the show, but there's a lot of people in the creative space now who are trying to use our power to pressure Spotify to stop running ads for ICE. And so it is possible that this may be one of the last times the Holographic Policy Radio on Spotify, if you're following us on Spotify, we will be on all the other podcast platforms. So if I take down the feed from Spotify, I don't want you to think that the show has gone away or disappeared. You can come and listen to us on Libsyn, on Pocket Casts, Apple Pocket, like whatever freaking podcast apps you like, it'll be there. But we might be coming off of Spotify if Spotify keeps running ads for like literally the Gestapo. I don't like that. My family are Holocaust survivors. I don't like them running ads for that shit where I'm spending my time. So if you are a listener, you can also reach out to Spotify and tell them that. But stay tuned for a toolkit around that. And it's also possible, like I said, HBO might find itself on the boycott list. I'm not sure because it's been running those ads themselves. And with that, I'm hoping folks are keeping active in keeping your communities alive and functioning. If you're looking for ways to make a difference where you live, you can always reach out to me. I know way too many community groups in need of help, and they're always happy to have you on board. As we like to say, keep it geeky.